Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. I'm very excited today because of the fact that I am finally back again live. Not that it wasn't so long ago. As a matter of fact, Andy showed up for the very first time in a long time, and we discussed Little Superman last week. But I'm very glad to be here with another That's Comical colleague. Cami is here. Cami, it's been a while. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you too, and always happy to talk about the subject at hand for tonight's conversation.
Yes, absolutely. We're doing another episode of Must Be Read. It's a while since we've done that, and I think Cami is a little bit more excited to be here than I am. But then again, we're going to be talking about a very unique comic book that came out last year over at Boom Studios, and I was very much wanting to do a must-be-read discussion about this specific book because of the fact that just this week we got the first of 5 issues of the follow-up series to that book. And of course, we're going to be talking about one of the most unusual takes on one of the most legendary characters in all of children's literature, and that is from Boom Studios, Alice Ever After, created by Dan Panosian and artwork by Giorgio Spalletta. So I don't know if a lot of you who have been watching this show know, unless you are actually people who have seen me over at my other channel along with Cami, but Cami is a die-hard fan of the Lewis Carroll classic, along with all of its other shapes and forms. So I don't think that Cami is going to disprove me on that.
Oh no, I have been collecting Alice since I was 12. It came to me from a mathematician, actually. My math teacher was creating an Alice game in the back room. One day I went to go drop off some homework, and I just happened to walk in a little bit after class, and he's like, "Oh, I'm back here," and I kind of caught the screen of what he was working on, and he was talking to me about my homework, and I totally zoned him out, and my eyes were planted on the screen, and he's like, "Are you even listening to me?" I'm like, "What is that?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm just creating a math game based on Alice in Wonderland." And I'm like, "What's Alice in Wonderland?" And my life has never been the same. My homework assignment that weekend was to go home and read the book, and I now own the book in over 30 languages. I have every Funko Pop of Alice that has ever been created. Thank God I finally got my Cheshire Cat. As you know, that was the pivotal holy grail for me that I got this year.
Cheshire Cat in the teacup, by the way. I just want to be specific there.
Yeah,
Cheshire Cat in the teacup.
The teacup, yes. I'm glad you clarified that. I just have every kind of knick-knack and just anything you could think of Alice. I have a ton of retellings of it, so that of course is what drew me to this comic book. I don't really think though that I'm a hard sell when it comes to Alice. I think as soon as I see her name or I see a depiction of someone wanting to do a retelling, I want to know the story. I want to dive in because I love to see how people interpret the story. I can tell you so many things about the history of Alice in Wonderland, about Lewis Carroll, our author, about his family, about the children that are incorporated in his stories and where they derive from. So, I am a plethora of Alice information, but I really do appreciate this comic for everything that it is, because you can tell that our writer is a true Lewis Carroll fan. You know that he knows more about Lewis Carroll than just Alice, and that just speaks to my heart. I love when you find something very unique like this.
Right. I mean, Alice in Wonderland, I will definitely say that I have not read the original novel. As a matter of fact, the funny thing is, when this comic was coming out, I actually reached out to Andy and his wife, because his wife is a booktuber. As a matter of fact, everybody, his wife, Blatantly Bookish, just had Andy on her channel, and they discussed Pride and Prejudice, which I thought was really cool. But when this comic was coming out, I was actually asking them if we could possibly do a buddy read of the Lewis Carroll book, because I never actually read it. So I thought it would be really cool to actually finally read it and have a discussion. But Alice in Wonderland and Alice and the whole world that is Wonderland in all of its shapes and forms, or at least most of them, are things that I have been exposed to. So even though I've never read the book, Alice in Wonderland is still very much in my lexicon, in my lore, in my blood. I mean, the 1953 Disney Canon Classic was either the second or the third classic that I ever saw, because I remember that the three movies that I saw that were Disney, the very first three movies, were Robin Hood, Pinocchio, and Alice in Wonderland. I don't exactly know which order they were in, but I know that Alice in Wonderland was one of the first three, and I love that movie to death. It is one of my all-time favorite Disney Canon Classics. But of course, I have seen the CBS miniseries from 1986 starring Natalie Gregory and a slew of other famous faces at the time. I even saw the late 90s NBC two-part miniseries with Tina Majorino from Napoleon Dynamite and Waterworld. I've even seen the not so talked about Care Bear's Adventures in Wonderland. And I've also seen the Tim Burton films. And I was so upset because of the fact that there were possible rumors that Sarah Michelle Gellar was going to play Alice in a film adaptation of the American McGee Alice video game, which would have been so amazing for the time, because that was when Sarah Michelle Gellar was Buffy the Vampire Slayer at her finest. So there are so many versions of Alice that I have been exposed to and have very much appreciated and enjoyed. So, of course, when I heard that this comic book was coming out, I was extremely excited about it, because when I saw what it was going to entail, I was like saying to myself, I'm very curious about how this is going to be done, but at the same time, this actually makes a lot of sense. Like, this could have been something that actually happened. When I read what it was going to be about, the plot, it reminded me of the nightmarish film for children that everyone talks about, and that is Return to Oz. Does everybody remember that beginning? What happened to Dorothy with the shock therapy? I was saying to myself, okay, this is Return to Oz in a completely different light. Let me pick up this book. And let me just say, Cammie, from issue 1 to issue 5, I was hooked. The story was entertaining. It was always keeping you on the edge of your seat. The imagery is so amazing. I especially love the transitions that Alice went in and out of Wonderland, and how the art style changes when she phases in and out of those two worlds. But we'll definitely get into the story itself, but clearly this is a must-be-read for the both of us. And I will definitely say, Cammie, I'm really excited for you to read the follow-up, because we will talk about that series as well when it comes to a close in November. It's called Alice Never After. I've already read the first issue. It just came out this week, and I'm already on board. So let me just ask you, were you having any sort of negative thoughts towards this story? Because I know how much of a beloved character Alice is to you, but to see her in a world where she is looked down upon by her father and her older sister and sent to a mental institution, and apparently the only way that she actually goes back to Wonderland is if she gets extremely high on opiates. I'm saying to myself as I'm reading this, I know that Cammie is probably loving this, especially because she is also a horror scream queen, but I was curious to know your thoughts about how Alice is treated in this story, and is this something that took away the enjoyment that you had from the story as a whole? Based on your opening statement here, I'm going to guess the answer is no, but I still want to hear your take.
Absolutely not. Did you ever play the Alice McGee PC game?
I have not played it, but I've watched many a walkthrough, and I've also seen the short-lived action figure line, the collectible action figure line that was made. I mean, American McGee's Alice, I will probably say, is one of the most original takes on Alice in Wonderland. And my favorite thing about that game is just the style of the characters, like Mad Hatter and Tweedledee and Tweedledum and the Caterpillar. I love them all. Yeah, it was a cool idea. I love the fact that Alice is insane, and she goes back into Wonderland with a butcher's knife, and all she wants to do is kill, kill, kill. I kind of love that.
Well, she actually, her parents die in a house fire. That's how this starts out. And she attempts suicide and wakes up in an insane asylum. So,
Right.
I mean, that for me was everything when this game came out. And I actually do have all of those toys that came out from EA Games at the time. And I have every variant. And let me tell you, the card guards were the hardest part of that collection. And that was actually, I think, what catapulted me into die-hard collecting, because once I completed that set, I was like, hey, if I can finish this, I can collect anything. So that was definitely a plunge into the collecting world. But after having been such a fan of this game and being sorely disappointed that it didn't become a movie, at the time, you know, you had discussed Sarah Michelle Gellar was on the docket, but also Marilyn Manson was supposed to have directed that, and it was supposed to be kind of a phantasmagoria story, and it was supposed to be very dark and very twisted, and I was so looking forward to that, but it never happened. So to have a comic book like this start off in a very dark, ominous way, I was here for it. You know, beyond being the scream queen that I am, I like to see, again, people's headspaces when it comes to Alice, because Alice can be very matter of fact. I mean, you can kind of recognize the characters, and I think that is a benefit of knowing the basic story, the true Lewis Carroll story, because you know the characters as they start to come to pass with other people's interpretations of them, because obviously, you know, here you see a different depiction of every character within the normalcy of this insane asylum. With that said, though, everybody interprets the story and the words so differently that it's almost magical every time I open up a retelling. And when it's dark and it's twisted, to me, it's all the better, because I really implore people to do deep history on Alice and the whole reason why Lewis Carroll wrote it. And it is a very dark story, even though it seems so whimsical and so childlike. The Queen of Hearts was meant to depict Queen Victoria at the time, and the eat me, drink me, you know, depictions within the story was about actually poisoning children at the time, poor children at that. So there is a lot of darkness to Alice in Wonderland. And if people knew that, then maybe things like this wouldn't seem so scary. They would be more embraced. And so, no, I loved every ounce of this. I loved the artwork. I loved that it seemingly got darker as we got into the series too, which was super cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the most interesting things are some of the characters, and I actually wanted to ask you if some of these specific characters that were in the specific comic, were they actually in the original story? Like, does Alice in the book actually have a pair of sisters? Because again, as someone who has seen Alice in other shapes or forms outside of the original novel, I'm not sure if these are actual characters from the book or if these are actual characters that were just created for the sake of the story. Because what I found so interesting about this book was Alice's family. It was so surreal to see the way that her family treated her, from her father, who kept giving money to the head of the mental institution to, quote unquote, try and get Alice well. But the truth of the matter is, if you really look at his nature, he just wants her off of his back to a certain degree, because of the fact that he's just sick and tired of the way she acts, but at the same time because of the fact that she's not the only one with a strange secret, and she knows his secret. And also you have his older sister, you have Alice's older sister, who is just like, oh, she's going to be fine. This is what's best for her. Like, she doesn't seem to really care about anybody else. But then you have Alice's younger sister, who absolutely appreciates Alice and believes that the fact that Alice has been sent to a mental hospital, this is not the right place for her. And she and her gentleman basically, she convinces him that Alice doesn't belong here and we got to get her out because something bad is going to happen. So tell me about these characters. Are they specifically made for the comic? And what did you think about their depictions?
Well, this is why I give this writer such high kudos, because this is probably the best retelling of Alice that I have ever read. And I will tell you exactly why, because this is a true fan of Lewis Carroll and the history of Lewis Carroll as he was as a man, not as just the writer, but as Charles Dodson. And I, as a fan of both the man and the writer, appreciate this so much. So in the story Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, Alice does have a sister, and her sister is kind of the one to always appear when Alice is getting into trouble. So she's obviously a very good big sister in terms of trying to keep Alice in line. But here within our comic book that we're referencing, Alice has two sisters. She has Lorena, which is her older sister, and then she has Edith, which is her baby sister, and then Alice, of course, falls in the middle. So a little bit of more Alice history for you. When Charles Dodson was a mathematician, and this was around 1850, he had a new dean that came in at about 1855, and his name was Dean Liddell. Now, if the name Liddell doesn't ring a bell to you, that is actually Alice's maiden name. Alice is a real little girl. Alice Liddell is the child that Alice in Wonderland was created not only for, but because of. Alice was told this story time and time again. She would meet with Charles and her sisters, and her sisters were Lorena and Edith. So the fact that the writer brought in the actual sisters into this story, Alice, Edith, and Lorena, and he made them the triad that I have just grown to love, because I know so much about their father, Dean, and the way that they had such a beautiful relationship with our author, Lewis Carroll. And he would tell the story on the riverbanks while taking photographs of the family. And it was Alice that eventually convinced him over time to put this to pen. She said, people need to hear this story. It's magical and it's wonderful. And so the fact that our writer actually took the real Alice Liddell and created her sisters in this story, but he had a twist, and I really, really appreciated the twist, because it took me a minute to make the connection, but Dr. Ludwig is actually the maiden name of Charles Dodson's mother.
Oh.
So I'm living for this retelling, because he has taken so many really cool tidbits from Lewis Carroll's real life and added them to this story. I think really the only thing that we're missing is the math element. If he could just throw some math in there, that would be amazing. But because math is so much a part of the story, and I don't think people know that either. You know, Rule 42. There's so much to that number, and so yeah, in this particular story, those are Alice's real life sisters. So I thought that was so perfect.
You see, everybody, this is why Cami is here, because she knows so much about this world. I'm learning a ton just by listening to what she has to say. But anyway, I appreciated all the facts you threw at me, Cami, but you still didn't answer the question. I was curious to know how you felt about her family depicted in the comic.
Well, I'm sorry, I thought I alluded to that, but no, that was what drew me to the family, because not only did he take the actual names of real life people, but he created this sinister story. And there are some different elements to it, like obviously the headmistress is made to be the Queen of Hearts.
Yes.
Her predecessor, Dr. Marsden, he's supposed to be the Mad Hatter, and then of course you have Tweedledee and Tweedledum are the bodyguards, the lackeys, if you will. So you have two sides to this writing, which is really cool. There is a lot of truth in this story, but then there's a lot of the whimsical part of what Lewis Carroll created. So I appreciate so much that he was able to just flawlessly mesh the two worlds together and create elements of real life people and depict them in a way that a lot of those elements or characteristics, I should say, of them are fact, and then take the fictional characters and still bring that darkness and that richness that is the Queen of Hearts and that is the Mad Hatter. And to have the Cheshire Cat be her father is brilliant, because the Cheshire Cat is the most sinister character in the Alice lineup. He is not to be trusted. He is one that will always be the voice of reason, but he will always steer you in the wrong direction. You have to trust your own instinct, which is the whole point to Alice in Wonderland, is Alice developing her own confidence in, you know, all this advice that she's been given her whole life. And so to see the flip side of the one person that you should be able to trust, which is a parent, and she cannot trust her own father because he wants to put her in an asylum to save his own secret, is just so sinister and gorgeous all in the same breath. So yes, I love the family.
That's right, the Cheshire Cat. I completely forgot about that little twist there, because at the very end of the story, we say that she has banished the Cheshire Cat from Wonderland. And that was a very interesting thing because of how Alice actually gets back to Wonderland. Because, you know, the truth of the matter is we've seen so many interpretations of Alice and how she got to Wonderland. And the real truth is, you know, did she actually go there? Was it a dream? And in this case, we see her yearning to get back to Wonderland, and the only way for her to get there is by taking opiates, which to me is like, you know, again, enthralling to read about, but knowing the Alice character, and maybe it's just because of the fact that I love the 1953 Disney version so much, it's just sad to see her fall like that, you know, because it's like, you take a look at the way she's depicted in this comic, and then you take a look at how she's depicted like in the Tim Burton films. They're two completely different versions of Alice. But that's the thing I love so much about this world, because every person who has touched this character, they truly made her their own and have created so many different mannerisms and personalities. And this is just a whole different level, because the thing I still love, and yes, I definitely agree with you about the author. He definitely had the passion for this story in mind, because even though Alice may be going down some dark paths willingly, he still manages to hold that innocence in this character. Like, yeah, she's taking drugs, but she's doing this for the purposes of going to her happy place where she feels alive, where she feels welcome. I mean, that first scene in the first issue where she sees all of her Wonderland friends and she goes to a tea party with them, and how excited she is to see everybody, it's just heartwarming. But then at the same time, the artwork just creates this atmosphere that even when she's in Wonderland, I don't know about you, but I felt those little hairs sticking up on the back of my neck and saying, she thinks she's safe, but she's not. She's still not entirely safe, especially because of the fact that the Cheshire Cat is in fact her father, and he's managing to control her in both dimensions, if you will.
Well, keep in mind too, from the beginning of the story, when Alice discovers his secret, he's the first one to drug her. He's the first one to introduce her to drugs, which in a sense, and this is why I love horror so much and why I'm such an avid horror reader and advocate of horror novels, because horror is the closest thing to our reality. And there's a really fine line that we teeter when we read horror. And so for me, seeing her father, who again should be her protector, be the one to introduce her to a world of opiates just to maintain a secret world that, you know, holds his profession, was just so sinister and dark to me. I just ate it up, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so brilliant, because this is the one person she's going to hold to high regard because it is her father. She no longer has her mother, and it doesn't matter what he does to her, she's always going to learn to forgive him. So to me, I don't see Alice as the villain here, and I don't hold her responsible for her continued drug use, because she was introduced to it and it has become a dependency for her. And for her, no, I don't think she's safe in either world. I don't think she's safe at home, and I don't think she's safe in Wonderland. But if you know anything about Wonderland, Wonderland is not a safe place to be. There are lessons to be learned in Wonderland, but Wonderland is not a place that you are intended to stay. You are intended to learn those lessons and then go home. The whole point to her journey through Wonderland is to find her way home. And in order to get home, she has to learn those lessons along the way. So I think that I give kudos to the writer here, because I think that as we step into this next series or leg of this series, I think that we are going to start seeing Alice kind of coming out of that. Because I mean, I don't know what your take on it is, but my take at the end of this story, Alice has gotten a lobotomy. And
Yeah.
in that, that's going to be one hell of a thing to come out of. People normally don't come out of that straight. So if she can come out on the other side of a lobotomy, on top of an opioid addiction, a slight heroin addiction, holy shit, she's going to be my new superhero, because that is one hell of a battle. And that will be all of the lessons she needs to learn to go home. And then shit, she deserves to go home.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, unfortunately, you jumped the gun a little bit, because we'll get back to that. But look, it just shows me how passionate you are about this book, and I appreciate that. So when she gets to the asylum, we also see that there's still more darkness and there's still more corruption. You see the headmistress of the asylum, she is basically trying to squeeze her father out of every penny because she is a greedy bastard. She's also got this really disturbing and creepy doctor working at her asylum / mental institution. And like you said, he is doing brand new kinds of medical experimentations for the purposes of keeping their patients calm. And that is the lobotomy. At the same time, Alice doesn't even know what's coming, but she also happens to befriend somebody there. Now, I could not point my finger on this gentleman that she meets in the asylum, but I could swear he's supposed to be a representation of an Alice in Wonderland character, and I just can't figure out who it was.
I haven't placed him either. I tried to kind of fit him into the March Hare for a little bit, but he doesn't quite give me March Hare vibes. I don't know if he is supposed to be a character, because I do feel that in some elements of this story, there are characters that don't quite fit the animation kind of side of Wonderland, but there's also a reality side to Wonderland. So I don't know if Matthew is supposed to be a character from Wonderland. I'm going to do some further research on that, but at this time, I'm like you, Nolan Boyd, I don't know exactly who he's supposed to be. I just know he's obviously a trusted advisor.
Yeah. And the thing that was also a big surprise for me, especially when we're getting into the last 2 issues, you expect a little bit of a happy ending at the end of this story, and you really don't get it. I was very, very surprised by that, especially because of the fact that, like, I kind of felt that when Matthew is discovered to have actually gotten a lobotomy, I was just basically saying to myself, I don't think we're getting a happy ending at the end of this book. And yeah, I was absolutely right, because even though Edith actually manages to rescue Alice from the mental hospital and take her home and care for her, unfortunately, she was a little too late. I don't know. Would you have liked to see Alice escape the surgery, or do you feel that the fact that she got the lobotomy is the best direction to go for the purposes of pushing the story forward?
Sorry, I just had an epiphany. Maybe Matthew is supposed to be the White Rabbit.
I was thinking maybe he could possibly be maybe the White Knight. I don't know.
No, because, well, the White Knight has such a small role in the story. I don't really see that. But the White Rabbit is someone that she always follows and she always finds, and that keeps her center of balance. So maybe Matthew is supposed to be the White Rabbit. But to answer your question, no, I do not feel that Alice should have not endured the lobotomy. I saw it coming. By the book 3, I was halfway through book 3, and I said, we are not going to get a happy ending. And praise the animation writers and cartoonists in this particular series, because I don't want a happy ending. In a story like this, when you start off so dark and tragic, and then in book 3 or 4 you start to veer off and give us like a quick happy ending, that kills the vibe. But when you are tried and true and you give me horror from beginning to end, that's a great story. That is great writing. He did not deviate from the writing. He did not deviate from the darkness. And I was eating it up. My black little heart loved it so much. And I am so glad it took the turn that it did, because now I feel like she has a hell that she has to climb out of. And Edith, bless her heart, you know, she had every intention of saving her before it got to this point. But I do feel that there will be a silver lining on the other side to some degree, but I don't know that Alice will ever truly be recovered. I don't think she'll ever be normal, and that's okay, because she's been through a lot. She's endured a lot of pain. She's endured a lot of loss, and she's not really had an opportunity to grieve. She's just kind of been medicated to get her through every level of her life. And I can't wait to see how this unfolds.
Well, to a certain degree, she sort of does get some kind of a happy ending in her own way, and that's the fact that even though she's not in the prime condition in the real world, but she's back in Wonderland. Like, she's able to find a much more easier portal to the place where she feels comfortable. And again, even though I said throughout the entire book, when she's in Wonderland, the atmosphere makes it feel like she doesn't feel safe. But at the very end, when she's in Wonderland, there's definitely a much larger sign and feeling of comfort when she's there. I mean, that's just my own personal opinion, but yes, I agree with everything that you're saying. But there's one thing I really have to credit Dan Panosian for, and that's the fact that I loved how he scattered major elements of the book in the story, not just through the characters or the depictions of the characters, but I did love the fact that there were some lines from the story in there. Like at the very beginning, her father says we're going to be late, late, late. Like, I just loved the fact that while I was reading this book, I really felt like I was reading a true, unofficial yet official kind of continuation to the classic story. But again, that's why I think Alice in Wonderland is what it is, even after all these years since the book was first written. So many people just love this world, and they will create their own avenues and worlds and atmospheres to something that's been here for so long. But at the same time, while they go in different directions, they never, ever do anything to stain the source material. The source material is near and dear to all of us who are fans. And even though we will look at Alex in totally different ways, in totally different directions, we will always keep the original source material intact and never truly change it. And that's another reason why I really appreciated this book. Even in the crazy ways that it goes, it still really feels that it is paying homage, and it is showing us that Alice in Wonderland is still one of the greatest pieces of literature that's ever been written.
You have to correct you. It wasn't her father that said we're going to be late. It was the custodian of the asylum that got murdered. That was who said we're going to be late, late, late.
I'm sorry.
But and at that point, I thought when he said that, that was our white rabbit. So I don't know. I'm still on the fence about Matthew. Maybe the custodian is the white rabbit, and because she holds him so near and dear to her heart, because that was her supplier, if you will, that he will continue to stay with her even after his death. However, when you're talking about Wonderland and kind of that's her comfort zone, I don't see it as her comfort zone. I see that as her empowerment, because I see that as where Alice gains her legs. She's got footing there. When she's in the real world, she doesn't have any say over her own life. She's either being drugged by her father, or she's being drugged by now the asylum caretakers. So she is never in full control of her own life and her own body in reality. But when she goes to Wonderland, she's the head boss. everybody looks up to her. They get excited when they see her. So I don't feel that we've truly seen the power that Alice holds in Wonderland, and I'm hoping that will come to life in the second leg of the series, because I really feel that that is where we're going to see Alice not only shine, but that's where she's going to break the habit. She's going to break away, and we're going to see what she's truly made of, because you don't go through this kind of hell and come out the other side unscathed without having a lesson that is going to not only alter your own world, but it's going to alter those around you. Whether they were for you or against you, it will also change them. And I think that's when Edith will get her reward for being the good sister. I think, we'll start to see good things happen for her. But then again, maybe if we're going to get a 3-part series, maybe we're going to see total hell and total chaos. But then also, to speak to your point about paying homage to the original story, I think for me, as such a tried and true fan of both the author Lewis Carroll and the person Charles Dodson, this speaks to my heart in both realms. And I think that whether you are simply a Disney fan of Alice in Wonderland, if you are an Alice McGee fan and you played the cynical, PC game, I think it was also on PlayStation as well.
It was.
I didn't play it there. I was a PC gamer, but regardless of where you've come into meeting Alice in your life, I think that this is a story that anyone from any walk of Alice's journey can pick up and find a connection to, and have an appreciation for the writing. Now, some people don't really fall into the darkness. I know you had mentioned, Andy had said he wasn't a fan of this, and perhaps because he is a fan of more the literature side of Alice and the whimsical world that was created by Lewis Carroll. But me, having adapted to the darker side of Alice, I just ate this up. And I do feel that when you truly have a lot of background and knowledge about the true characters that were created in Carroll's story, there is so much darkness, and there is just so much evil, underlying evil in the story, and it's masked by all this whimsical, color. But if you know the truth, this kind of story is the truth. This is what really speaks to you. This is what drives the journey. So I really love it when people get dark with Alice. I love it when people aren't afraid to kind of bend those rules a little bit. But the joy here is that they do keep the original feel to the connection of the original story. So it's just a beautiful thing from start to finish.
Yeah, and so everybody, if you haven't read Alice Ever After, I just want to let you all know that the trade paperback is available. You can pretty much get it wherever you get your graphic novels, but I would always appreciate it if you wanted to get a graphic novel, go try and get it from your local comic book store. Give those stores the business. There's so much great stuff at your local stores. I don't want to give anything away to you, Cammie, in regards to the first issue of Alice Never After, but yes, everybody, it's the same team. Dan Panosian is going to be doing the writing, and we've got Giorgio Spalletta doing the artwork. Again, the first cover is absolutely gorgeous. I will just say, if you were looking for specific things that you didn't see throughout this story, I will just say that there were reasons as to why. And right off the bat, in the first issue of Alice Never After, I will say that you'll understand a little bit of it, but I will also say, Cammie, you are not prepared for what you're going to read in that first issue. You're going to love it. And, I know it.
I love bind-ups, but this is one of the few that I will tell people, if you can get your hand on the floppies, the artwork is just stunning on each of these, and there's so many cover variants for each of them. I think there's like 5 different cover variants. And what's so cool about the artwork on this is it really is an homage to the Tenniel drawings of yesteryear of the original story, but it also does speak to Alice McGee, because these characters are very cynical, they're very obscure. So the mesh of this, I just cannot commend the artist enough. Between the writing style of meshing the two worlds and then the artistry of combining the two worlds, this is just freaking genius. And these covers are just absolutely
and I know for a fact that we are not the only fans about in regards to this book, because the funny thing was, when I went to get my comics this week, my copy of Alice Never After was not in my stack, and I was like, why is it not there? I'm pretty sure I gave it to you to put it on my pull list. Apparently, there was some miscommunication, and it wasn't on my pull list. So I went to the shelf where the new releases are to see if there were any copies, and there was one copy left. And the manager of the store said that there were like 4 copies ordered. There were 4 copies on the shelves, and 3 of them like sold out in minutes. So people clearly read the original 5, so there seems to be a big demand for the sequel. So like I said, Alice Never After #1 just came out this week, so it will be concluding in November, and I am really looking forward for Cammie to come back to discuss Alice Never After with me. But don't worry, guys, you'll see her many times before that, I am sure.
Absolutely.
All righty, everybody. Well, thank you very much for watching. Go check out Alice Ever After and Alice Never After, guys. If you're a fan of this world, you will definitely be pleasantly surprised. But in the meantime, everybody, we will see you in the next one.